Welcome back to this week's episode of Be Bolder. This week, I am lucky enough to be joined by a good friend of mine who I've known for quite some time, Mr. Andrew Rea. And I will never in a million billion years do justice to his interesting career path and some of the changes that have been unfolding in his journey. So, Andrew, thanks for joining us. And why don't you tell us a little bit about you today?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Interesting is one way to put it. So, I'll try to be brief here and just keep it relatively summarized. But more or less, went to a no-name school for finance. Thought I was going to go be an investment banker. Ended up starting a company when I was 20 with two other people. It was a low-speed electric vehicle company. We thought we were going to change the world. Raised about $1 million and ended up, we made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot, and we decided to sell the business and basically got our angel investors their money back. After that, I was broke and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Ended up talking to a lot of startups and venture firms, and which led me to Columbus. Joined a firm called Eco Capital, early stage venture firm and venture studio. Was there for a couple of years on their investment team. And then let's see, about 8 months or so ago, I joined a tech and community startup called OnDeck, where I run their an angel investor program that's largely a community of operator angel investors. So people that are founders, startup operators, and emerging fund managers that are investing in early stage startup companies. So, and on the side, I write a little bit, invest a little bit, tiny angel checks, and just trying to figure it out as I go. So that's the high level version.
Awesome. Well, I definitely want to dig into some details there because it sounds like you were very resilient and sort of figuring out the way to take next steps and, use your previous experience to sort of drive you into the next thing. So let's talk a little bit about your startup adventure first. So you were very young when you started this thing to change the world. So tell us, how did this come about? And then I'm sure I'm going to have a litany of questions after that. But first, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So it happened. My brother-in-law was really the only entrepreneur I'd ever known. I really looked up to him. He and his family sold their company. And so we were talking and jamming on ideas like, we've always wanted to do something together. So let's go start something. He ended up getting connected with somebody else. They were looking to looking to do these. So it all kind of starts with this thesis we had around essentially that suburban areas were going to change from a transportation perspective. So in urban cities, obviously Uber, Lyft had really gotten big. We thought that you'd also start to see these smaller micro communities in a lot of suburban areas where people kind of had everything they needed within reasonable walking distance, or very, very short commutes. And so that there would just be less need to have cars, or at least to have two cars. And so that a lot of people, instead of having two cars, might have one car and then one smaller low speed vehicle that would be a lot cheaper. But the problem with most low speed EVs is that they're basically golf carts, and they don't look sexy. Most people in nice neighborhoods don't want to drive those to the store or on a Friday night or whatever. So basically we made them look really cool. It was a good price point, obviously lowers carbon footprint, and the thinking was that we would eventually see a lot more adoption happen in a lot of these communities, which we did see some. There's actually still some companies working on similar concepts to this, but more or less we were way too early at best. So but anyway, kind of pulling that back into the reality of how it all happened. We basically worked with manufacturers in China to design and manufacture some of these, and then we basically went to market with a couple designs. We actually had some reasonable sales early on, but ultimately just it wasn't taking off like we wanted it to. It wasn't going to be a venture scale business. And so it was either we could kind of limp on and turn it probably into something that was, cash flow break even and survived. But I don't think we weren't excited as founders. We weren't really on the same page about what we wanted to do. And it wasn't what our investors signed up for. So we ended up eventually finding a buyer for it, and then just kind of went our separate ways.
Awesome. So was there one moment when you recognized that, hey, we could limp on and probably be okay, or we should sell this and break up?
Yeah, I think I remember the moment we decided to do that, but I think it was more of like a collection of just like data points that kept
Mhm.
happening that made us kind of realize, okay, we bit off more than we could chew here. And so, but I remember the moment we decided to. I was in Florida, where I technically had not dropped out of college yet, and is just on the phone with my brother-in-law late one night, and we just kind of made the decision. So, but yeah, it was more just like enough data points over time, and then we lost out, and we did lose out on a pretty big sales contract that kind of was like the nail in the coffin.
Okay. Okay. So you figure out how to sell this thing, which kudos to you in getting your investors' dollars back. That's really hard. I mean, you've been around this arena a long enough time where you know that that's not always what happens. And so, okay, next step, you said you were broke pants for a little while. So let's talk about that. When you were struggling and trying to figure out what you were going to do, what was going through your mind at that time?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I mean, basically, it's like a classic startup thing. We did raise money, but we weren't paying ourselves. So like that which I actually encourage in most cases. Founders should probably pay themselves. Don't do that. But yeah. So anyway, I was also, you know, like just a college student, right? So trying to like pay my bills and whatnot. So I basically spent like 3 or 4 months just cold emailing like lots of people. So like so right around the time that I actually like this was ending for me, like we hadn't found a buyer yet, but basically I was the most broke of the founding team. So I kind of started to step away and figure out what I was going to do first next, if that makes sense. And I had a friend who was trying to break into investment banking. And so he was just cold emailing bankers and setting up meetings. And I was like, I could probably go do this for, I didn't want to be a banker anymore, but I was like, I could probably go do this for something else. So it's actually really easy to figure out what somebody else's email is. So I just would spend probably like somewhere between like 6 to 8 hours a day, sometimes more depending on the day, in Starbucks, like sending emails to anybody and everybody. Early on, it was like probably just spamming, and it was terrible. I'm sure I would like regret it if I went back and looked at some of what it was, but we figured out how to get a lot more targeted, and then ended up just talking like companies, typically startups, or I originally it was only startups. I kept getting pushed to look at venture by startups. So, but yeah.
Oh my gosh. So you're walking through all of this, you're cold emailing these people, and now you start to get some hits and some bites. And so, first of all, let me just back up and say, like, this is one of those things when I tell people, like, hey, you can do anything that you want to do. It's just how much time and effort do you want to put into doing it? And it sounds like you put a lot of time and effort into doing it. So, did you know you wanted to go this venture early stage path as you were emailing these people, or was this just the next thing that you thought about in your career?
Yeah, I think I had known I had wanted to be an entrepreneur for several years, but I didn't know like being an entrepreneur was like a very high level idea. I didn't know what like venture was really for a long time, but just through the process of starting the company, kind of learned a lot about some of that. So I think I knew I wanted to start something again, but I had no idea like what that was going to be. And in the meantime, I felt like I just wanted to learn. So the best way to do that seemed to be either going to a venture firm where you're going to see a lot of industries, a lot of companies. I did like investing in finance just because I did study that in school. But then just like or being just at a startup, you can learn a lot from the process of building it. Ideally, while getting paid at the same time, and just like
Plus.
hopefully like learning from what success looks like. So that was kind of like more just like I'm gonna go find a place to land, learn, and then hopefully from there that will also give me the both the combination of the knowledge, but also the resources, social career capital that you need to really have a better chance of success in this industry. So it probably wasn't fully developed, but I know I wanted to go in this direction, so it was more just
Okay.
kind of figuring out where to land within it.
So, did you ever feel like you don't come across this way to me? I'm going to caveat my question here that what I'm about to ask, but you weren't in the space, you didn't know that much about the space, but you were like, hey, this seems super interesting to me. Did you ever have any imposter syndrome or things that were sort of you ever felt were holding you back as you're starting to send all of these emails and maybe getting some bites, but you're still trying to wade through these murky waters and
Oh
take
yeah,
the next
oh yeah.
step?
Oh yeah, totally, all the time. Like I think so first of all, it was just like, I mean, when you're going head to head, like I didn't go to a notable school, so you're going head to head sometimes with like these like Ivy Leaguers who like, like doors tend to open up quicker for them
Yeah.
sometimes. So that would be a piece of imposter syndrome. But even just in conversations, like I remember actually a friend, a mutual friend that used to work for you in venture, I met him in Columbus during this whole process and remember literally shaking right before I was about to like my hands were shaking, legs were shaking before going in to meet him, which now in my mind feels a little odd just because like we become such good friends. But uh, at the time, yeah, it was like I remember like a lot of the conversations. It was just like kind of terrifying, and you didn't feel like you belonged in the room. So
So what did you do to overcome that?
I wish there was like some magical moment, but it's just like getting reps in helped a lot. Like just I remember I made a trip to like 5 different cities while I was like finishing up school and kind of in this like in between phase, and one of which was Columbus. And I had like 2 days of meetings there. And then the first day, I feel like I like did terrible. Like just performance was awful. Everything was really, really bad, and kind of got back home dejected. But then I showed up the next day, and the next day actually went a lot better. And I think a lot of it's just like there's certainly like tips and tricks and things you learn to like manage yourself, but I think a lot of it you don't really learn those, or at least I didn't, unless I just put myself there and got reps, and you eventually just get better with time and practice.
100%. You just kind of stepped into the fear, right? We can't do the
Yeah,
next thing that we want to do
yeah,
and have
yeah.
it, and especially if it's scaring us, if we don't step into the fear and the fire. And it usually turns out it's not that bad, right? But
Right, yeah. I mean, all of the good things all or most of the good things in my life have usually been on the other side of fear, just to some degree. So it's kind of like getting out of your comfort zone sucks sometimes, but it leads to really good things.
it does. So it did lead to something that I think you learned a lot of good, bad, in between things from. So talk about the next adventure. So you stepped into the fear, and then turns out you got a job. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that for a second.
Yeah. So I was like kind of it got fortunate right at the end. I had like a few different like opportunities. I was between like this startup that I really liked and the venture firm, but the startup was taking too long to offer. And so I ended up in Columbus at Eco Capital. It was an interesting experience. Like I think the first of all, just like it was in a mostly focused on we did do a little bit of like just random investing in generalist categories like fintech and SaaS, but most of it, especially the studio, was really focused on deep tech, which was not like my background. I guess technically people would label the startup I did as deep tech, but I wasn't like part of the founding team because I was deeply technical by any means. So it just like and then all the more so when you're interacting with PhDs and researchers that are so like deep into their field. It's a little it can be a little it was in the early days like a little overwhelming, but
Yeah.
I think that and then just there's a lot of or just a lot to learn both in terms of like how we approach things, how to be in some of these like more tense negotiations. But I think there was good, there was bad, kind of like you said, but learned how to source and close something like an investment from start to finish. Learned how to like what it looks like to incubate companies. So met a lot of really, really cool people. So I think it was kind of like just a crash course in this industry, the good, the
Sure.
bad, and as well, just like, I mean, by nature of venture, there's like you touch so many different industries too. It's kind of it's a great place to just go explore, especially if you're not entirely sure where you want your career to end up. So
Yeah. No, that's amazing. So what are some of the most valuable lessons you learned being there?
yeah, it's a good question. I think I learned a lot about being calm, or at least being able to return to calmness in like very, very charged rooms and situations. Like whether it's you're negotiating something and like trying to like close out like some kind of investment, some kind of like you're negotiating with like whoever it is. Maybe you're like raising follow on funding for a portfolio company, or even just like investment committee meetings could be incredibly tense if people have different opinions. So, and there's usually like venture tends to attract a lot of strong personalities.
It does.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of type A people, and everyone thinks they're right. So, and being like a more junior person in that room, is you have to make sure you interact a way that's going to set you up for success. So, so anyway, like I think I learned a lot about just like those dynamics, negotiating. Learned a lot about just a bunch of random industries, but I think that I think those were like some of the positive things. I think I also learned just like some of the challenges of why it's actually really, really difficult, for instance, to for deep tech research to actually turn into companies, because that it's a very nuanced area, and you hear people talk kind of uneducatedly about it sometimes, but it's a very challenging area. So I kind of learned the good and the bad of that.
Sure.
And I think just like probably some of like the things that go wrong when you don't align incentives in a way that are
Yeah.
going to be win-win for all parties, and just how important that is for any venture to succeed, whether it's, you know, like your own startup or you're investing in something.
Amen to that. So, because I know some things that we've talked about in times past, and then I feel like you sort of started to grow and outgrow your environment. That happens all the time. We get to a place where we've blossomed, we've turned into our next thing, and we've got to move on. And talk to me a little bit about that, as you started to feel that maybe coming up in you, and how you started to think about your next move after that.
Yeah, I think the pandemic happened, one, which I think
Mm.
was for like everybody, right? Like a great, I don't know about great, but a forced moment of reflection just on like
Yeah.
what's happening in life, like what are you doing, like where do you want to go. So I tend to be the kind of person that like has those moments every 2 weeks, or maybe more like every 2 days, but
Oh,
uh, but half joking. But yeah, it's so anyway, I think that just like that forced me to step back and think about like, hey, what do I actually like, where am I going within both this company, this firm, where do I want to go, either within this firm or just in general with my career. So I kind of took, I think at a certain point it felt like my learning had started to tap out, and I'm one of these people that prefers to be on the J curve of learning if possible,
okay.
or else I can go do other things. So I kind of explored a lot through that, just trying to figure out what made sense from a next steps perspective. And I think where I landed is just that being at a startup that was, I know what it's like to grasp at product market fit and not get it. So being being at a company that's hitting product market fit, and then part of that scaling process, you build up, and if that company succeeds, it's an incredible credential on your resume, which is, you know, just important and valuable, whether people want to like admit that that's the way the world works or not. And then B, it's you get to see what that success looks like, and learn a ton while something's just growing faster than you can handle. And then typically, if you've got product market fit and you are growing like that, you're going to be around a lot of really, really smart people. And there's just I think those kind of environments like force you to sink or swim. And I really like being put in those spots. So it kind of like seemed like that was the place to go. So, but finding those companies, everybody wants to work for those companies that are going to
Sure.
take off. So, but yeah, that kind of was where I landed. So then it
Okay.
was just a matter of like figuring out what kind of role, what kind of company, et cetera.
Okay. So then you have found that out. So talk about the cool things that you're working on then in your current role.
Yeah, so OnDeck is at a high level. I'll step back and just try to explain that, though it's not always. It's when people look at our website, I think they get a little confused as to what we do, and in fairness, it's a little hard to explain sometimes. But it started out as this community for founders that were trying to figure out like what their next thing might be. Many times they might, you know, still be employed at their last thing or the place they sold their company to, but really like ideating or just discussing kinds of things they might want to start. So it wasn't even a company, it was just a community dinner series, that kind of thing. Eventually that turned into what's now known as the Founders Fellowship. And it's like people compare it to an accelerator, but it's really not an accelerator. It's just a program slash community for, again, that like same concept, just with more
Okay.
structure around it. And it's usually like time bound to like, I think like in the early days, it was like 8 weeks, and bringing those people together, putting like really one of the things that's valuable about college, really, like you put a lot of really, really smart people that are ambitious about the same kinds of things in a room, and you put support and resources around them, and special things tend to happen. So, and from those like early cohorts, a lot of like really incredible companies that have gone on to raise hundreds of millions of dollars in angel and venture capital came out of those cohorts. So then the pandemic happened, and the company just like found out not only did this work remotely rather than just in person, but it actually worked really, really well. And there had never been more demand for community and being in the same place and focused on the same things as a group of your peers than when everyone was stuck in their homes during lockdown. So, but long story short, they blitzscaled, and we ended up launching quite a few of these in a bunch of different areas. One of which is the Angel Investor Program, which I now run, but which I'll kind of like tail back to in a second here. But essentially the way the company's evolved today is we support ambitious people. We're trying to build a higher education institution for mostly like things that are like not necessarily happening in college, but just like your entire career. So there's a collection of programs for entrepreneurs and founders. There's a collection of programs for people trying to figure out what they want to do next in their career. There's programs focused on people while they're in their career. So think like product managers, engineers, designers, etc. And then there's a collection of programs for investors. So that's kind of the main structure as it stands today. And then there's a lot of like collective pieces that are kind of tying that into that broader community together. But my program specifically is operator angel investors. So these people are mostly, like I think I alluded to before, like they're successful people. So they're pretty far into their careers for the most part. They've got capital to deploy. You know, a lot of they might have like recently their company might have IPO'd. They might have recently had an exit. Or something, or they're just like a very high earner, and they're in a position to both, not just from capital, but also they have a lot of expertise and connections from being in the technology industry. So, so essentially, we build programming and community around these people. Put them in the same room with each other. And so there's kind of like one value is just like the programming that we provide, but second value to them is the just community by putting in the same room with each other. And then third, there's an incredible number of founders in the OnDeck ecosystem through programs like OnDeck Founders and others that we've launched more recently. So kind of being able to work with those founders very, very early. And like, as you know, you've invested for a while, like deal flow is the name of the game, and getting access to this stuff is important. So, so yeah, we but basically like my job is to build community and support these people. So it's kind of this interesting role where I spend a lot of time doing a lot of different things, but we're recruiting angel investors to our program, working with the ones that are already in our community, like trying to help them and support them and connect them with founders in OnDeck or just broadly speaking, wherever. So a lot of like kind of investor type things still, just by nature of the role. And yeah, really just whatever it takes to support them. So, but we're roughly, there's a few hundred people in the community now, and some incredible investors, and yeah, just trying to build that out while OnDeck itself is obviously growing pretty quickly at the moment. So it's been a lot of fun. I'm enjoying it, and yeah, just trying to learn every day.
Awesome. So I love all of this. And then tell me, have you traveled recently, or you're moving? What's happening there? I
yeah.
see lots of things, and I'm like, I mean, currently it looks like you're in space. You're on the Jeff Bezos rocket. I'm not sure what it's like.
Yeah, I wish I was in space, but sadly this is just a background. But yeah. Let's see. So I kind of started like just hopping around when the pandemic began, just like a little bit, but I've been based in Columbus for the last couple of years, and then just have used that as a home base. And then OnDeck being fully remote, I pretty much have just like, I was in Mexico for a while. I was in New York for a while, Chicago. So I've really just been bouncing around. So I'm either homeless or a digital nomad, depending on who you ask. So yeah, like I think my parents are convinced I'm homeless, but yeah, so I'm basically Airbnb-ing around different cities at the moment. So trying to figure out like where I'm gonna land. So I'm in Cincinnati visiting family right now, and I'll be in NYC for the next couple months. So if anyone's there, hit me up. Would love to meet up.
Yeah, and Andrew is a wonderful connector. And so, you know, if you're a founder, investor, want to be of either of those things, I think Andrew's a great person to get connected with. So tell me, before we wrap up here, tell me some of the most important lessons you think you've learned so far to date in your career.
That's a good question. I think having principles is really important, and just knowing what's important to you and knowing what kind of person you're going to be. And because if you don't decide those things really early, or at least like be intentional about refining those and iterating on them as you go, you can find yourself like questioning things that you think you would never like question, like when you come to a situation that's in a gray area ethically, let's say. But if you've already made your decision on the kind of person you're going to be and what your principles are going to be, you it's almost like you can be on autopilot to some degree when you're in those situations. So I think just knowing, like, if you've like done the work of stepping back and deciding how you're going to operate and what person you're going to be, what kind of person you're going to be, that's really helpful. To make that like a little more concrete. I think that something specifically for me that I believe this is a overall superior way to operate in the world is I'm a really big fan of this like ideal of giving first and being positive sum. It's kind of become a bit of a buzzword sometimes, but there's a really good book by Adam Grant called Give and Take. And but essentially, like, if you I'm just a fan of like giving, not because somebody else is going to give you something or because you need to get something from someone else, just because it's like it's a better way to go about the world. And like there's like you're not losing because you're helping other people and because other people are winning. So so you have to be careful not to like get taken advantage of doing that, but for the most part, like, it's worth running that risk because in the grand scheme of things, you're going to have just a lot more fun and build a lot more meaningful relationships if you operate that way. So so I think that having principles like that has been really helpful, and just trying to iterate on those kind of things. Being willing to work really hard is a huge advantage. I don't know if that's like a I don't know how it's kind of like one of those things. I'm not big on hustle porn myself, but like I do think just knowing that there's trade-offs for everything. So being willing to work really hard at something and be really focused on it for a long period of time can be a big advantage. And then just like finding really smart, good people and putting yourself in extreme situations and chasing after extreme goals around those people has really gone well for me so far. So I think that just when you put yourself in those spots and bet on yourself, good things tend to happen, and you'll probably end up further than you would have like playing it safe or taking a smaller bet. So
you'll certainly learn more.
Indeed.
That's for darn sure. So I absolutely love all of that, and I mean, I think we share a similar sentiment, right? Like, give first. Yes, once in a while it kind of costs you a little bit more than you think maybe it should, but you don't regret giving someone your time or, giving someone an opportunity to, talk to you because they need that or whatever it's going to be. And I often find that it ends up coming back tenfold over. So I love that and appreciate that. So what's your next great thing that you're going to undertake?
I don't know. I'm really enjoying kind of where I'm at. I'd say that I know eventually I want to start something, like start a company of some kind, but I'm trying to position myself for when that day comes to be very well positioned to be successful at that. But and there's a lot, as you know, that goes into that. So that's kind of like the longer term stuff. I'm a very bullish on this trend of operating and investing, and there's more and more people straddling the line of doing both. So so I'm like, though I'm like mainly working at a growth stage startup right now, I am angel investing on the side. So I've really enjoyed that. I'm not really exactly sure where that's going to go, but that's been a lot of fun. So at the moment, we're pretty heads down and focused on building something really meaningful at OnDeck, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. So that's like where the vast majority of my time goes. And then just on the side, trying to like support founders through investing and in helping them fundraise and et cetera. That's like the main stuff. Eventually I do think I'll start something. But it's just a matter of like finding the right timing and the right thing that's not only meaningful to me, but that I'm actually like positioned to start. Like there's a lot of like great ideas out there, but doesn't mean you should be the one to start them, in my opinion. So yeah, so eventually I think there'll be something like that. But for right now, I'm just pretty focused on trying to help build OnDeck and do something really generationally impactful, and just trying to support founders and be helpful as I can with getting the right checks into people that are building potentially like world changing companies in a really positive way.
Awesome. So last question then is going to be, in your moments of transition, because you're pretty young in your career, I would say you've got a lot of good solid years ahead of you, but you've already had a few transitions. What's the most valuable thing you've learned from those transitions each time that you would tell someone as they're going through it, or maybe that you would tell yourself the next time you have to go through it?
Yeah, I think that transitions are tough, right? And I think it's always scary for anyone. I think going forward, I would hope I do more of this, because I haven't always done it perfectly. But just I think when you know you need, like, you can hit the point of knowing you need to make a change sometimes before you know what the change needs to be. So if you already know both, like almost immediately, it makes things kind of easy, or at least easier. But if you don't know what the change needs to be, that especially can be scary. So just allowing yourself the time to reflect and figure out like what you actually want to do next, that's not wasted time. So I think it's important to do that. I think, and then I think just like not being afraid to like set your sights high on something. Like I think with every moment of transition I've made, I've repeatedly had at least someone tell me I'm being too ambitious with what I'm like looking for, or my standards are too high or whatever. And that's
the person who has no goals and like who I can't.
Exactly. Yeah. Or even just someone that like has an outdated view on the world. Like there's like people will tell you for a variety of reasons, whether it's how you look, how old you are, like what you have or haven't done, or even just like whatever mental model of the world that they have that you don't fit, will tell you not to do something just because of that. And those people, A, rarely change the world, B, they're wrong, and C, why not you? Why not now? Like I think that there's people have done some pretty crazy things that just like in ways that have surprised a lot of people, and so I just think like why not, like doing anything meaningful is hard, so why not like take the big bold ambitious bet?
Yeah, be bolder, right?
Right.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. It's really great to catch up with you, and I'm glad that you've landed at your next great thing, and it sounds like everything's going well. So I can't wait to see what you continue to do and how you continue to reshape the world. So for everyone who's listening here today, thank you for joining us. And as always, don't just be bold, do what Andrew says, be bolder. And we're out.